Peace be upon you all. This is your host, Aminah Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen, where we speak with passionate, motivated young people on the issues that they're addressing in their community. You're all watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and more recently, Apple TV as well. And today's discussion is focused on mental health and what our mental health as a community, what mental health in minority populations, in the brown community, in the Muslim community means right now, especially from March of 2020 when this pandemic hit. We saw that physically many people were impacted, but also the mental health of many, not just in our community, but across the globe was impacted. And to discuss what are we doing moving forward, right? As many people continue to get vaccinated and our society, our community tries to return to normalcy or whatever that means post-pandemic, we will be discussing what we can do to ensure that we stay sane, that we stay healthy, and that our mental health is a top priority. And to discuss this today, we have our phenomenal and well-accomplished Amelia Noor-Oshiro. And Amelia Noor, she identifies as a brown Muslim woman, a scholar, an activist, and a proud survivor of a suicide attempt. As a social and behavioral research scientist, Amelia offers expertise in the study of health disparities, specifically in suicidology among minoritized populations. Amelia is honored to be leading the first original research study, which she will be telling us more about, of Muslim mental health selected for federal funding by the NIH, I apologize, to find novel insights on suicide prevention among the Muslim American community. A key distinction of Amelia's academic and scholarship is her philosophical approach to implementing social justice praxis through community-based participatory research approaches, critical race theory, and intersectionality theory. That was a lot. That was a mouthful, I know. I was looking through her bio and there was a lot more to it, but I said that I will try to highlight as much as I can. We have 25 minutes today, and just speaking to Amelia for a couple, 5-10 minutes before, I know that she has a lot to share with us. Thank you, Amelia, for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Bismillah, Amelia, it is absolutely phenomenal, the work that you are doing. As someone that has been impacted by mental health issues, in your life, as someone who is a mother and someone who is in grad school right now, you have a lot on your plate, but you are giving back to your community. You mentioned before this interview that this is not something that you do for money. It's something that you are passionate about. But in COVID-19, right, I want to start off with just talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of our community. Let's start with the Muslim community, the brown community particularly.
Absolutely. So I think it comes to at no surprise to everyone that mental health is a hot topic right now. One way that people have described the phenomenon of COVID-19 in terms of mental health is collective trauma, right? So collective trauma as in trauma that's not experienced just by an individual, but by a group of people in a society. And it's also known as mass trauma. And people, everyone is exposed to trauma. It's just a distinction of how intense that is, what kind of trauma that is, the frequency of the exposure, that sort of situation. And so it's safe to say that most people have experienced some form of trauma. And COVID-19 has brought in itself this disruption of a trust of how we understand the world. And so that's part of what the traumatic response is kind of people trying to process that, hey, I thought the world was safe. I thought we had access to healthcare. I didn't know it was going to be this bad, or, that sort of thing. We just didn't have the infrastructure put in place, and we weren't well prepared to understand what was going to happen.
And from what you're saying, it seems like there is a level of shock, involved in all of this. But do you feel that a year compared to a year prior, have we moved on just a little bit? Many people have reported loss of sleep, feeling lonely, have felt distressed, depressed, more anxiety. Has that calmed down just a bit with vaccinations going up? What do we know about that?
So in general, anytime there is some kind of stressor, a life stressor, um, you will expect to experience disruptions in normal daily functioning, right? So for example, your sleep. You're gonna lose the ability. I mean, a lot of people get affected in terms of insomnia, right? And anxiety and insomnia are really closely tied together. So COVID-19 isn't just a communicable disease, right? It's not just a virus in terms of it affects us in our bodies. It's also something that is a social phenomenon. It is disrupting our social networks, right? Like how we interact with people and who we consider friends, who we consider people we're going to intermingle with. And when that comes into play, then our mental health is also a huge part of the equation.
Right. And Amelia, you are someone who is an expert in identity-based stigma and suicide. That is something that you are focused in on. So have you seen that the Asian American population, for instance, or people from a minority group have been more impacted? Their mental health, has it been more impacted or impacted in different ways, perhaps?
So I wish I could give you some data on that. Unfortunately, right now it's way too early to definitively give you a response on that. I will say though that on the aggregate, and that is when we consider populations at large, we don't see necessarily an increase in suicide. Um, we're actually seeing a decrease right now, but that's preliminary data. We really have to wait until the pandemic is quote unquote over, as in we have shifted into another new normal, in order to gather some more data and look at it from a subgroup level. So analyze it by racial categories. I will say though that stigmatized identity, right, is a huge contributing factor to suicidality. And there have been many different populations and groups of people who have been stigmatized in this country historically, right? Muslims are one of them, and Asian Americans, obviously. Uh, a lot of people, I think, didn't necessarily realize, even many Asian Americans themselves didn't necessarily realize, right, that their identity was stigmatized until COVID kind of came and it was kind of front and center that, wow, people behave weird and strange around folks who appear Asian. And so I think that it's not necessarily a direct correlation that, COVID has caused Asian American mental health to worsen. But I would say that it is a large contributing factor, a huge influential variable. And that is because also that, the country is a racist country. Racism is a fabric of American society. It's an assumption that we have to understand. And therefore, what that means is Asian Americans are not exempt, and they never have been, right? And even if you look back to the United States Census and what was counted as an Asian race, you will see that there was actually, historically, they were categorized as white first. So, and there was a case of a young Asian man who actually tried to categorize himself as white. So even just the kind of understanding of Asian as a racial group is yet to be shaped, right? At this point, we don't even collect subgroup data in terms of disaggregating and unpacking exactly what constitutes the Asian race. Asians are actually the majority race in the world, right? 60% of the world is of Asian origin. So I am Asian, and we are the global majority. But it's interesting because despite being the majority, we don't have the power dynamics that you would assume a majority group would navigate and have. So that's an important consideration.
And I think, Amelia, it's really interesting how you're highlighting that this stigma, right, around a particular group. Now it is Asian Americans. It has always existed. Just because of the pandemic, it has been highlighted. It's been put at the front, at the center, but it's always been there, right? It is part of our history. And I think that is an important point to note. But as someone you are involved in much community-based research and activism. How has that been impacted by COVID-19, right? Have you been able to continue your work maybe in a different setting? Has that research been ongoing?
So I'm happy to report that the grant actually just got processed
Wow, that is amazing.
about a month ago. Alhamdulillah. So we're prepping up to start data collection in the upcoming months. So in terms of how the grant was proposed, I actually, subhanAllah, it was one of the toughest times in my life trying to submit that grant because it happened while I was pregnant and COVID had hit, and I was teaching and I was writing, and it was a big mess. But they had asked us to adapt the research design and as much as we could to be conducted in a virtual setting. So by the time I did end up submitting the grant, it was about a month into COVID. And I had to kind of pivot like everyone else did and just kind of shift to a virtual and online setting, which has its advantages, actually, right? So for a topic like suicide, for example, which is a pretty sensitive topic, and anonymity can actually work hugely to our favor when it comes to researching this topic and garnering participants. It didn't necessarily affect us in that sense. However, where it did affect us is, excuse me, the stressors that are going on in COVID right now, right? How are we going to be able to disentangle the kind of stress that people are experiencing now and the mood shifts that correspond to that stress, right? And perhaps the suicidality that kind of comes with COVID? How are we going to be able to tease that out with the concept of discrimination and facing stigma and that being internalized into a suicidal behavior? That's going to be the key question moving forward.
And Amelia, we will continue talking about your work right after our short break. You're all watching us on Galaxy 19 Satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Apple TV as well. We'll be right back with Amelia right after our short break.
Hey, love, I can.
Welcome back to NextGen. I'm here with social activist Amelia Noor-Oshiro. Amelia, thank you so much once again for being here with us. But what I want to ask you is that many of our audience, many of the people who tune into NextGen are students, are young people. What can young people do right now to ensure that they are prioritizing their mental health, especially if they come from communities and backgrounds where mental health isn't talked about, where it is completely and fully stigmatized? What can they do to take care of themselves?
Absolutely. So the first thing is understand that seeking help is not a weakness. And seeking help is really more like seeking energy. So you don't even have to really conceptualize it as seeking help. You can conceptualize it as you're drained, you're burnt out, you're hurting, you're in pain, and you need energy. So that's one thing. But really the formula for preventing mental health issues is to have the proper social supports. So, excuse me. So in terms of social support, that looks like having someone you can call if you need some help with anything. Like, for example, if you need, I'm so sorry, this is uncontrollable on my computer.
Don't worry.
So what it looks like is getting the proper social support. You know, if you need a ride somewhere, you have someone to call. That's like a measure of social support. If you're feeling down, you can go to someone's house, or you feel like there's people you know off the top of your head that you can text and they can check in on you. It's actually very basic, but believe it or not, loneliness is a huge public health epidemic. And in fact, loneliness is so bad for your health that it's equivalent to being, actually even worse in some studies, to being a chain smoker. So loneliness is extremely, prevalent right now with the isolation going on, social distancing. So it's important to have a good, strong social support network. And self-care. What does self-care look like? It means you're taking time to yourself to do something that brings you joy or just brings you energy. For example, taking a nap, making naps a regular part of your routine, going out for a walk, going out in nature. Nature has tremendous benefits for mental health. And if we take a look at the Sunnah, right, going to the cave was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's practice. So that was his meditative space, right? So he used to go there, and that's where the Quran was revealed. So we have the tools. It's just a matter of
Amelia, you just froze up a bit at the end. It's a matter of, and then you froze up just a bit after that.
I said it's a matter of what tools work for you, because we have the tools. It's just a matter of what works for you.
Right. And Amelia, I think that, to our audience, to our viewers, hopefully they do take that as a sign to engage in a bit of self-care today, to go out on a walk, to take that nap. I mean, for me, it was really encouraging to hear that taking a nap is self-care, because I always tear myself apart every time I take a nap. So I'll remind myself that for me might be my version of self-care. But Amelia, you have had experience in helping our community and trying to bring awareness and trying to do research into mental health in the Muslim community, in the Brown community. But what has inspired your work? Where does all of this energy, this passion come from?
Well, I'm a survivor of a suicide attempt myself. And I think it's important to be out and proud about it. And I think it's important to be vocal about it, because I know I'm not the only one. I also know that we've had several suicides occur in the Muslim community, some that have been broadly, broadcasted in the media. Recently in Austin, Texas, with the family that was a murder suicide. That was South Asian, Muslim, second generation immigrants. Literally the demographic that I am studying for my research. And they also had, supported some of the theories that I have for what drives someone to be suicidal, right? And I will touch upon that a little bit more and say that to your earlier question, sleep is extremely important. Sleep, in fact, is one of the most underwhelming factors that people mention when it comes to suicide prevention and mental health. When I tell people how do you prevent suicide, I say start with sleep. And I really should have said that earlier, because a healthy sleep routine going from 10 p.m. To whatever time you wake up, but it has to be around 10 p.m. because that is when the body settles with the natural circadian rhythm around your environment, around how the sun sets and all that sort of thing, and having the right temperature in your room. So the ideal temperature is around 68 degrees. And you can look up tips on how to get really good sleep, but sleep hygiene is an extremely important predictor of mental health. And in fact, it can without sleep, a person can enter a state of psychosis and actually die within 3 days. So the body has a natural healing mechanism and deep breathing that occurs during sleep and during things like meditation can actually help improve your mood and prevent suicide.
This is really interesting, Amelia, because I'm not even going to lie to you. The last night I got less than a couple hours of sleep. So I'll, remind myself, and I think it is a reminder to many young people who are stressed, who have a lot of workload, who procrastinate many of the times and do their work later at night, because that is the time where they get that random boost of energy, maybe at 3 a.m. But it's definitely a reminder to ourselves to prioritize our sleep, and that does have a big impact on our mental well-being. And Amelia, last thing, right? I wanted to ask you, how can we as a community support people who are going through mental health issues? How can we be there for them and not be the reason that they don't ask for help, that they run away from seeking therapy? What can we do to be a good means of support?
Amina, it's not even necessarily destigmatizing at this point. I think we've done a great campaign. The millennials and all of us, we've done a great campaign trying to destigmatize mental health. At this point, it's about access to resources and normalizing the need to seek support, especially among people who are not millennials, right? So even our parents, right? We should encourage them to go and get and seek counseling. The family is the unit where the individual resides, and the family is the unit within which the community resides too, and vice versa, right? So in order for us to be healthier as a society, we need to provide the proper support systems in place. And there is no age limit to going to counseling. There is no age limit. And as a parent myself, I can tell you that it has improved my parenting by me addressing my own childhood traumas and being able to self-regulate my emotionality, right? My anger or my sadness. Being able to learn those skills is not something you get from like a parent handbook. No parent was ever handed a parent handbook. But going to counseling, and especially the older generation right now, going to counseling and going to therapy is something that you're investing not just for yourself, but for your kids, who actually the second generation immigrants, the kids like me who are born and raised here, are at the highest risk of suicide. Their parents aren't. But if the parents work on positive parenting techniques, and there's a great book out there by Sister Nuha al-Shogiri called Positive Discipline in the Muslim Home, that parents can actually get their hands on and learn positive parenting techniques to self-regulate and model, right? Model how it is we should behave toward each other and how we should regulate our emotions. Because once we're able to master those skills, we're able to model them, and they become naturally absorbed within children.
So it definitely seems like there's a lot of learning and unlearning to do in our community, our families. But thank you, right? Thank you, Amelia, for this. I think that this episode was not just informative to hopefully our audience, but to me as well, where I felt that, I was checking things off in my mind, making sure that I'm, engaging in self-care, that I'm making sure that I make sleep a priority. So we really do appreciate your work and the commitment that you have towards our community. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, and please keep me in your dua.
Likewise, and to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in today. And until next week, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.